which we know here in Albuquerque are the pueblos of Isleta, Sandia, and surrounding communities. And so thank you so much for starting in gratitude with me. I think that hopefully that sorts out. Thank you for catching that, Zoe. I think that hopefully we have that sorted. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of my fellow presenters this evening, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the workshop. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Enedith.
Hi folks, my name is Emily Lopez. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm the policy campaign manager at YUCCA, so going to be representing at the Roundhouse this year. And I've been doing this work with YUCCA for about a year and a half now. Much of my background is in community organizing, research, and focusing on different forms of justice, bringing and ensuring justice to our communities. But really happy to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Savannah. I use she, her pronouns. I got started off with YUCCA this past summer. I was a summer fellow and I'm super happy to be continuing work with them on the steering committee right now. Just happy to be supporting whatever work that they're doing. I'm in this space because I kind of grew up learning about climate change. I first learned about it in middle school science class and I felt a really strong pull to take action. So I've been involved in climate activism ever since then. But as time went on, I learned more about other systems of oppression and how patriarchy and colonialism and capitalism have all worked together for years and years to create this all-encompassing crisis that we're now seeing. So that's kind of what motivates my work, and I'm really happy to be here with you all in this very politically significant moment. And pass it to Yash.
Good day, everybody. My name is Yash Pending. I am Diné Korea Apache. I live in Tewa territories, also so-called Albuquerque. I am a steering committee member with YUCCA and formerly was part of their fellowship over the summer. I also do advocacy with a couple other organizations like NMCAN, where we do legislative policy advocacy for foster kids and people impacted by homelessness as well as the juvenile justice system. And I've also been a part of Indigenous advocacy groups for Indigenous communities and all that they deal with. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. What brings me to YUCCA is definitely a need, or I guess a drive to be active in my community, and I feel like climate justice feels so out of reach for a lot of people, and it definitely did for me growing up, knowing about these types of issues but not knowing what my part in it was. So I'm really glad to kind of have this new supportive community where I get to work with and collaborate and advocate, and then now teach other people about what's going on so that they can do the same. So yeah, I'll be passing this to Zoe.
Thanks, Yash. I actually managed to not put in a slide for myself, so I will just quickly introduce myself. My name is Zoe Croft. I work as communications lead for YUCCA. And in terms of what brought me into the space, I think, first of all, I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to be here and learn with Isabella and Janelle, who I've had the opportunity to work with in the past, and just really excited for folks to learn more about getting involved with policy. And I will go ahead and pass it on over to Janelle.
Thank you, Zoe. Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Astorga. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I am the co-executive director of Learning Alliance of New Mexico. And what we do is education, policy work, and youth rights. So we have some after-school programs that teach students how to organize within their schools with an anti-racist lens. And Bella can share a little bit more about that and what we do, but I'm super excited to be here. I was brought to this work when I was 13 years old, so I've been organizing around education and youth rights and reproductive rights since I was 13, so for about 15 years now. And I've been partnering with YUCCA for about 3 to 5 years, I want to say. So it's good to be back and doing this work with you all. And I will pass it on to Isabella.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Isabella, she, her pronouns, also a co-executive director of the Learning Alliance of New Mexico. Yeah, and as Janelle shared, we do work around youth voice, youth action, and also working with adult communities like educators and other education stakeholders on how to support youth voice and uplifting youth voice and working with young people to show them the different ways to create change.
So before we move on, I wanted to ask all of you to take a moment to reflect on what climate justice is to you. You can take a minute to think about it, and then you can share your thoughts in the comments. And there are no wrong answers to this. No matter what your understanding is, just you can share in the chat. Or if you're on the live stream, you can write it in there as well. Someone said, saying hello to a raven. I love that. Climate activism means an equitable now and future for everyone, ultimately. Love that too. An end to extraction, for sure. Protecting the sacred. Climate justice to me means working to help those disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. I think we're all on the same page here. Land back, for sure. Clean air, clean water. So yeah, YUCCA really organizes around this idea of climate justice, and I wanted to introduce who we are. So we are a youth-led and BIPOC-centered movement fighting for climate justice in New Mexico. We started off in response to climate crises experienced in our communities. We like to always recognize that those experiencing the first impacts of the climate crisis are those who have been disenfranchised for centuries by the same systems that cause climate change. So our work must be deeply connected to the struggles against patriarchy, racialized capitalism, colonization and genocide, as well as extractive and exploitative systems of production that currently dominate our world. So at our core, our work is guided by 5 key demands. One is to create an economic transition away from oil and gas. This is what we like to call a just transition, so you'll hear us say that a lot. We want to shift away from a dependence on fossil fuel revenues as a state and as a worldwide community. Our second demand is real climate legislation. We ask for 100% renewable energy by 2030 with equity, racial, economic, and environmental justice at the forefront. And no nuclear energy out.
Are you still here?
Yes, I'm on a call right now.
How?
Sorry, could you take it?
We're gonna go to hockey.
Okay. I'm really sorry. Our third demand is a moratorium on fracking to protect our water and the health of our people. Number 4 is to pass community solar legislation to empower our communities to advance climate mitigation goals right now. And 5 is to hold elected officials accountable. We call on the governor and others to declare climate emergency, sign on to the Equitable and Just Climate Platform and the Green New Deal, and pledge to stop taking fossil fuel and utility money. Now, I would like you all to share in the chat which of these demands resonates most with you. You can share a number or type a quick comment, and I can write in the chat what these all are if you forgot. Johnny said a just transition, one that really centers workers. Another just transition. Another just transition. A moratorium on fracking and a just transition. So yeah, at the end of the day, our work is ultimately about building power and demanding accountability and creating systemic change. Thank you all for being a part of this movement and for supporting us. This fight really does require every single one of us showing up and changing ourselves on our world. On that note, I will pass it over to Yaj.
Awesome. Thank you, Savannah. So I'll be talking about some of the tactics that we use as YUCCA and what we do physically, like what are we going to, like different actions, speaking to senators or representatives at the legislature. So first, I wanted to kind of get a temp check on, let's see, you already did. What do you think of when you hear about activism? Let's see. At YUCCA, we use a diversity of tactics to ensure our demands are heard and acted upon. Change requires pressure on multiple fronts, so we combine methods to maximize impact. Does anybody have any ideas or thoughts about what activism looks like, or what direct action might look like? And you can type that in the chat or unmute and speak if you want. Yeah, as Johnny said, for example, we did a blockade the other day in front of the legislature, and in the middle of the blockade, we painted a big mural that's an image of the world. It's also a clock counting down that says "Time's up," and so that was a call to action for everybody at the legislature to take action to support bills that protect the environment, that protect our communities, and support reducing our carbon footprint, reducing our emissions, and reducing our extraction. Are there any other examples that anybody can think of protesting? Yes, definitely banner drops, marches, sit-ins. Yeah, those are all really great examples. Okay, and moving on, so we have protest and direct action. So this is a tool that we can use to show our demands, but not just our demands, but what we believe is the next best, the next move that is going to be influential in creating meaningful change. So for the example that was given by Johnny, the painting of the mural in front of the Capitol building, we wanted to challenge fossil fuel companies and policymakers and be in their face about something that we know they can't hide from and that they're actively participating in and may or may not be supporting bills that are protecting us. For civil disobedience, this is something that's a little different. This is when laws and systems uphold injustice. We organize actions like sit-ins, banner drops, and blockades to expose harm and demand change. So let me get a little more detail on that. I said that a little weird. So civil disobedience goes into protesting, basically. Civil disobedience is a term used to describe us disobeying the direction or the policy that we know is destructive or that needs to be changed. And so you organize typically to create a demonstration, to bring awareness to something, to show to the public that there is a flaw in whichever system that you're looking at. For political education, we know that knowledge is one of our strongest tools. So through tools like this workshop, for example, we can share info in a very meaningful way that can be distributed in different ways. We also have social media, we can do teach-ins, and we do different kinds of education. So we do climate justice education here specifically, but as well as teaching about systemic racism, because that is another part of issues that people suffer from in this world that are not separate from climate change. Has anybody here ever heard of, what is it called? I believe it's like climate racism, or someone remind me if that's not the right term, but basically this term talks about the intersection between climate change and the people that are directly affected by it. So, for example, in Mexico, environmental racism. Yes, exactly. So, like indigenous communities are proportionally more impacted by energy extraction because of where we've been pushed to on reservations, as well as our lands being rich in energy resources. And so many times we are forced into situations where we don't get to choose where this extraction happens. And so there's a bill that we're looking at right now talking about a buffer zone between extraction points and schools, because there are many places where there's not any policy restricting that. And we know that proximity to extraction points and proximity to pollution negatively impacts our health, specifically indigenous people who now have higher rates of X, Y, and Z, just different health impacts that are really, really scary. Yeah, okay, so moving on. Another tool that we have is electoral advocacy. And so this means urging voters to engage in voting or to advocate for climate accountability to ensure that policies center frontline communities. And so this can be like lobbying at the legislature, talking to our representatives, writing letters, reading bills. And so these are all different tools that we use pretty frequently to move along these processes and make sure that we are protecting our communities. And each tactic complements the other. So we create a lot of strategy out of these tools that we know work from past actions, from history of different organizers as well. And we are building the systems so that we can get to that just transition, like we mentioned before. Let's see. And I want to know if anybody has participated in any of these things that you'd be comfortable sharing, any maybe artistic protests that you're proud of, or political education that you'd like to mention to the group. No, it's kind of a hard one. No worries if nobody has any more to say about that. But thank you for listening. I hope you all can get more involved with these tactics. Okay. Deidre said, as proud core member of Valencia Water Watchers and organizer in Valencia County, I'm proud to have helped organize against an ordinance in Valencia County that would make fracking easier. That is really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's such an important role to take up that we definitely need in this community. And they said the county commission passed the ordinance anyway, but the experience was pivotal in Valencia County. Definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So I'll be passing this to Enedith now. Thank you all.
Hi, folks. It's great to see all of you again. So this year, YUCCA is going to be prioritizing both environmental justice legislation and bills that might be coming up during the session, but also trying to extend our network of support even broader. So being more intentional, more intersectional when it comes to our work at the Roundhouse, and also recognizing that the moment that we're currently living in calls for a lot of political hostility. So one of the opportunities that we are offered this year is potentially setting guardrails in the state to ensure some form of protection or even support for our communities that are both facing the brunt of the climate crisis and even legacy environmental racist policies, in addition to supporting bills that are going to improve our community's quality of life and also provide them the necessary resources so they can continue to prosper, so they can be happy and joyful and be a well-rounded and healthy community all around. So we are going to be supporting bills that are being led and steered by other groups. Like, for example, I know that our Earth Care crew is going to be supporting the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. That's going to be heard this Monday. But we're also planning to support a bill that would legalize rent control here in New Mexico to ensure that housing remains affordable and accessible to our community members, to young people such as ourselves, and to those who may need it as well for our homeless population here in New Mexico that is currently being impacted due to rising cost of living. But we are still taking multiple initiatives through our different coalition spaces. So these are 3 bills that we're going to be pushing forth with our NM Laws Coalition. And the NM Laws Coalition stands for the New Mexico Land, Air, Water, and the Sacred. And this is a group of folks who currently have a constitutional lawsuit against the state, against our governor, legislators, and multiple environmental agencies to try to hold them accountable to Article 26, I believe, in our New Mexico Constitution that guarantees every New Mexican the right to a healthful and beautiful environment. And so these bills that we are proposing this year are an attempt to trying to address and move progress from the complaints in our constitutional lawsuit. The first one being HB 33, which is to combat hazardous ozone air pollution. It's prohibiting new emissions in high ozone counties. So as we know, in places such as the Permian San Juan Basin, oil and gas extraction is pretty prevalent, and it's actually the second most prevalent oil fields in the entire country. And as a result of that, the American Lung Association has recently given New Mexico 6 New Mexico counties an F or D grade because of ozone pollution. So what this means that, people are being exposed to a limit of air pollution beyond what has been identified by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so hundreds of New Mexicans, day in, day out, are being exposed to really unhealthy air. So because of this exposure, it can lead to severe health effects like issues with your breathing. It can aggravate lung diseases like asthma, chronic bronchitis. It can even increase a risk of premature death. Long-term exposure can lead to an impact on one's airways, causing pulmonary diseases, or even potentially making more vulnerable populations susceptible to these negative health effects. So what HB 33 is trying to do is to ensure that we can set a plan that's going to reduce air quality pollution in the San Juan and Permian basins, and giving the legislature the authority to regulate and limit this ozone air pollution. To ensure that, they are protecting both our environment and our public health. As that is their obligation under the Pollution Control Clause in our state constitution. The next bill that we are going to be prioritizing with our NM Laws Coalition is HB 34, which is the Oil Conservation Protects Health and Environment bill. And so what this bill would do is to give the OCD, the Oil Conservation Division, the ability to take in consideration the impacts of both public health and the impacts it may have on the environment when it comes to their task of overseeing oil and gas permitting. At this moment, they don't have the ability to look at public health and the environment when it comes to issuing permits to oil and gas companies. So this bill is looking to essentially amend the Oil and Gas Act to include considerations for these two specific things: is protecting our environment and protecting our public health. This would also, allow us to consider the negative effects of oil and gas development and the effects it may have on our communities. So this amendment would really try to push for that reconsideration for those two pretty impactful and drastic determinant factors. And the last bill that we have is the establishing a Children's Health Protection Zone, which is HB 35. And so what this bill is looking to do is to create a 1-mile buffer or setback between oil and gas facilities and operations such as, old abandoned wells or unplugged wells and schools. Because at this very moment, about 34,000 New Mexican children are being exposed and being within proximity of oil and gas facilities and production sites that we know that they are both inhaling this air while they're at schools for 8 hours of the day, or they are just simply within proximity of this pollution. So we know that at the moment there's about 4 spills of oil and gas waste a day. So, students are within this proximity. This bill is looking to essentially establish a health protection zone, a health buffer zone. So creating a 1 mile between these operations, so any new oil and gas facilities and schools. So no longer allowing for new permits within this 1 mile. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And then one of the other initiatives that's being pushed forth at this very moment is through the Public Power Coalition. And so this coalition is proposing the NMFA Local Solar Access Fund. And so what this fund does is that it creates a grant through the New Mexico Finance Authority, both giving them resources to support tribes, counties, municipalities, school districts, and land grants for any solar and storage projects to power essentially public buildings and public infrastructure. So things like community centers, libraries, schools, fire stations, or even street lighting. So what this would do is it would offer the opportunity for these different entities, such as tribes, counties, and municipalities, school districts, and land grants, the ability to solarize and to get solar energy in their buildings and their public infrastructure. This is an attempt to both create community resilience when small rural communities throughout New Mexico might be hit by natural disasters. But also giving the ability for cost savings, reducing the cost of energy, building capacity, building new jobs, giving folks jobs for installing solar, and also, creating a system to stimulate more of a local economy and more of community ownership over their energy system. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So, as I have mentioned these bills, and I'm sure as you will learn about how a bill is passed with Janelle and Isabella soon, I just want to urge all of you to talk in support of HB 35, which is going to be heard next Thursday at 8:30 a.m. With the House Energy and Environment and Natural Resources Committee. So folks are more than welcome to come to the Roundhouse with YUCCA and our NM Laws Coalition and give comment and support in room 317. But in case you can't make it in person, then you can also join on Zoom. So I've attached the Zoom link and I'd be happy to share it in the chat. But if you can do either be in person or on Zoom, feel free to call the representatives that are on the House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee, or send them an email expressing your support for HB 35. Please check the chat. I'm going to be sending some details there about which legislators are on the committee, the one-pagers, and more information for our bills this session. But thank you all, and I really appreciate your support and the opportunity to start building, resilient climate communities here in New Mexico, and also working towards environmental justice. I'll pass it to you, Janelle.
Thank you so much, Annette. I think we're pulling up a different PowerPoint now, so just give a couple minutes for that. Awesome. So yeah, there was a lot of great information about some of the bills that are coming up this legislative session. And now we're going to get into a little bit of background and start with the basics, so we're all on the same page on what is the legislature, who makes up the legislature, and then how a bill becomes a law, and also what is a bill, right? We heard a lot of House bill and then the numbers. So what does that mean? So we'll start. If we can go to the next slides, please. So first, how many, you can go, yeah, one more. Yeah, how many legislators are there? So there are two chambers that we call the House of Representatives and the Senate. So in those two chambers, there's different types of representatives. There are 70 members in the House of Representatives and 42 members of the Senate. And those two different chambers have different roles as well. So when we're looking at who is our representative and who is our senator, we each have one of each of those chambers. So you can look up who is your representative and who is your senator. Next slide. So the Senate. The Senate is considered the upper house of the legislature. And within the Senate, there are leadership as well. And we'll find the same in the House of Representatives. But these are the people who have been in the Senate and are more experienced to lead. So the people who lead the Senate have roles, and those include the President pro tem, who is the lead of the Senate and is also the person who will kind of be the main spokesperson for the Senate. And then we also have our lieutenant governor, who is the chair. And the lieutenant governor, if you aren't familiar, is the person right under the state governor. And some of the other leadership roles that we have in the Senate, as well as in the House of Representatives, are the president pro tempore, like I just mentioned. we have the majority whip, the minority whip, majority floor leader, and the minority floor leader. So they're all super fancy names, but it really is just types of roles and leadership for different parts of what the Senate members do. So on the floor, there's ways for you to vote on the floor, there's ways for you to speak on the floor. And these leaders help you kind of navigate that as a senator. And on the floor really just means when you're in the roundhouse and you're in session, you're on the floor in this kind of like, in our stance, a circular room where all the senators get together and talk about bills that are being introduced. So that's kind of a way for them to be in consistency and have leaders to help make that process go a little bit more smooth. The leadership that we just talked about is elected by members of the Senate. So everybody in the Senate has to vote for who would be the majority whip, minority whip, and the floor leaders. The minority means the party. So we have two parties, Republican and Democrat, who are representative in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the lesser amount of members in the Senate versus the majority is usually what the minority party means. So the party that has more members is the majority party. So the president pro tempore always belongs to the majority party. And right now, we have 26 Democrats and 16 Republicans in the Senate. So right now we have a majority Democratic Party, which means that our pro tempore is part of the Democratic Party. Next slide. So the House of Representatives, this is considered the lower house and it's under the Senate. And this is led and chaired by the Speaker of the House. So again, we have the same rules and in leadership, which are the majority whip, minority whip, majority floor leader, and minority floor leader. So again, these are just fancy names to help us kind of get through the session in a responsible way. And the leadership is also elected by the members of the House. And minority and majority parties and rules are determined the same way as the Senate, so you have to be voted into those positions. And right now we have 46 Democrats and 24 Republicans in the House of Representatives. So Democrats are the majority in both the House and the Senate in this instance for our state legislature. Next slide. So we have checks and balances, and this is the same for our state as it is for the federal government. So hopefully some of us have learned in school that there are 3 branches to the government, and there's the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. So the legislative branch are the ones who make the laws. So when we go to the legislature and we have the legislative session, which we're in right now, they are the ones who introduce bills or introduce laws so that we can hopefully pass those laws into action. The executive branch is the one who enforces the laws. So making sure that these laws are implemented the way that they are intended to be, that they have the resources needed to be implemented in the way that the legislature had intended. And if for some reason we feel like those laws that were passed are not being enforced in the correct way or at all, we can always go to the court system, which is the judicial branch, and that is the branch that interprets the laws. So they will be able to tell us whether or not the executive branch is enforcing the law in a way that it's supposed to be enforced. And all of this goes back and forth. So there's a checks and balances. So again, this works the same way on the state level as it does on the federal level. And the legislature in the legislative session is part of the legislative branch. The New Mexico Supreme Court and other court systems, again, are the judicial branch. And then the governor and the lieutenant governor, as well as all of their cabinet, make up the executive branch. So that's kind of a way to determine what process we're in at the moment. So right now, like we're talking about the legislative session, we're in the legislative branch. So it's kind of the beginning of making that law. I know that as organizers, sometimes when we follow bills and follow laws, it's always the enforcing part that kind of gets us frustrated because It could sometimes look really good on paper, and this could be the best bill or law ever. But once it gets implemented, it might not look the way we want it to. So that's where organizing comes in. And we can make sure that what we have on paper and the way it's been implemented in our schools or in our communities is how we envisioned it. So it's really good to always check back and make sure that the bills that we're following or things that get passed are actually being done, first of all, but also being done in a way that we want them to help our communities instead of hurt our communities. So with that, we go into what is a legislative session. So the New Mexico State Legislature meets every year starting on the third Tuesday in January for either 60 days or 30 days. So 60 days sessions are what we're in right now. And this is the legislative session. So we focus more on all the legislative matters, introducing bills, making sure that there's no amendments to any other bills. And if there is, then we're following those to make sure that the bills, again, are helping our communities instead of hurting them. And then the 30-day sessions are limited to budgetary matters. So anything that has to do with funding goes into the 30-day session. Legislatures can also call for special sessions, which I know we had last year during the summer. There was a special session. And this is called by the governor and the legislature to address any urgent topics that might come up the next session. So since there was no budgetary session coming up this year, I know that there was some special sessions to talk about funding and monies that happened over the rest of the year to prepare for now in January and February. I lost the PowerPoint. I'm not sure what happened. Isabella, can you bring up the PowerPoint again? Awesome. Thank you. So we can go to the next slide. So now we're on committees. So I know Anadith had mentioned that one of the bills are going to be in a committee hearing on Thursday. So what that is committees are made up of legislators depending on the chambers that they're connected to. So the House of Representatives will be in House committees and the Senate members usually are in Senate committees. So for example, if there's a House of Education committee that's made up of representatives from the House of Representatives, and a bill is assigned to one of those committees after it's introduced because it will go into the same the same topic that the bill is talking about. So if it's an education bill, it'll go to an education committee. If it is a funding bill or a budgetary bill, it'll go into a budgetary committee. And what they do in the committees is they have a chance as representatives or senators to ask questions about the bill, make amendments if needed, if they want to change the language of the bill. And this is also where community and the public can come and express their support or their not support for the bills. So there's also interim committees that have both representatives and senators together on these committees. So both chambers will be involved. And one of those examples is the Legislative Education Study Committee, or the LESC, that puts out really important information about what is coming up in the next session, what they think is important as a team, right? Because it's both senators and representatives. So those committees are super important because we get to hear from both sides of the chambers. And legislators that are in these committees are often chosen based on their experience in those certain areas. So we might have people who have been in education for a long time that are representatives that are put on the education committee, or people who are experts in health put on the health committees things of that nature. So when you hopefully go on Thursday and support HB 35, you'll be able to hear the representatives talk about maybe their experience and why they feel like this bill is important based on how they have experience in that health field, since that will be in the House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee. So just kind of connecting those dots for you all. Awesome. So again, some of those standing committees in New Mexico for the Senate portion are the Conservation Committee, Education, Finance, Rules, Public Affairs, Judiciary, Corporations, and Transportation. And on the House of Representatives side, their committees are Agriculture and Water Resources, Appropriations and Finance, Commerce and Economic Development, Consumer and Public Affairs, Education, Energy, Environment and Natural Resources, and Health and Human Services. So these are some of the committees that you might want to look out for if there's a bill that you're interested in and it has to do with any of these topics. It'll probably go through one of these committees before it hits the floor. So keep an eye out and look at those and see who of the Senate or the House of Representatives is on that committee so that you can get a sense of whether they are supportive or not supportive of the bill that you are trying to pass. So with that, if you are interested in learning who your legislators are, you can always go to the nmlegis.gov website, which I just put in the chat for you all. And you can click where it says legislators, find my legislator, which is the link that I just sent. And you can start with your representative. And on the left-hand side under House of Representatives, click search by your address. Under the address, you just type in your home address, you click search, and then a name of your legislator and a picture will pop up and you'll be able to see all the information about them. So their name, their office number, what committees they're in, what they've supported in the past. You can see where their stances are, all of that stuff. And you can repeat those same steps to search up your senator. So this is really important, again, if you're looking up what your senator is or representative is and what they've supported in the past. So you can decide for yourself if you feel like they might support the bills that you are supporting or if they might need a little bit more of a push from you all. But this is a very convenient way for you to find out who is in your district. And just a reminder that it's not just when it's legislative session. So your legislators are working year round on bills that they're going to bring up the next year, working year round on talking to community members, seeing what you need. And there's also sometimes a pot of money that is there that your legislator can potentially help you get for your organization or for a certain cause that you think your community needs. So if there's something in your community that needs to be done that has been an issue, you can always talk to your legislator about potentially funding that project or how they can support in different ways. So now that we know a little bit of the background, I'm going to pass it to Bella to give a deeper understanding about how these bills actually become a law.
Awesome. Thanks, Janelle, for the overview. I'm going to go ahead and stay off camera since you all saw my little internet issues, so hopefully it'll stay stable. But yeah, so all of that is a lot of context to see kind of like what are the different aspects of the legislature and how it kind of works, who like are the people that you're voting for. And then this portion is really talking about like the how an actual bill is created and how it ends up becoming a law. So a bill itself is an idea for a new law or an idea to change or get rid of an existing law. So this can look like some of the things that the bills that YUCCA shared earlier that have specific topics that are things that folks want to do to, you know, protect people's health and different things like that. It can look like, oh, there's a really old law that's like on our books that really isn't relevant anymore and we want to repeal that and no longer have it on the books anymore. So that can look like a lot of different things. And ideas for bills can come from anyone. Legislators can come up with them themselves. Community members can come to legislators and talk with them about community needs, as well as organizations and even corporations, and work on creating bills together with the legislator. And then there's also memorials and resolutions, which are declarations that are made by the legislature, that are signed or not by the governor. And they create, they don't actually like create an impactful like law, but there's something that like the legislators are agreeing that like they think is a good thing. So this can be like a memorial that they believe that youth voice is important, but it's not like an actual law that says like, oh, these are the rights that young people have in order to have like to have their voices uplifted. So it's more of like a, yeah, this is something that like they all agree is a good thing kind of a thing. And then I'm going to share this short video with you all that talks a little bit about how a bill becomes a law. And it's on the federal level, but it works the same way for here. So hopefully you all can hear it okay.
You sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be.
Hold on. I saw that you all might not be able to see it, so let me make sure. Okay, I think you all should be able to see it now.
You sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." And he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. And pray that they will. But today I am still just a bill.
Those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably. Otherwise, I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like the representatives and they think
If they vote yes, what happens?
the Senate and the whole thing. It's all over again. Just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. If they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait. There's a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be alone. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again. And by that time, you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill. He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Awesome. So that's just a short video to kind of quickly explain the process of how a bill becomes a law, and then I'll kind of like go more deeply into everything. But the law that kind of went through the different aspects of it, and like I said, was talking about it like on a Congress level, but it works the same way on the state level. So again, step one is creating a bill idea. In New Mexico, community can meet and have direct contact with our legislators during and outside of the legislative session, which is not something that every state has, which is really awesome, which means that community members can be in conversations with legislators all throughout the year about issues that their communities are facing that could potentially become bill ideas for the upcoming legislative sessions. Any person or group can bring an idea or for a bill or a solution to an idea or to an issue to the legislature and to a legislator that could be a potential sponsor of that bill and carry it through that process that you just kind of saw. Organizations and community members can meet with those potential sponsors to share our stories and help inform the development of how that bill is created. And if the legislator agrees to sponsor the bill is sent, or the idea is sent to a bill writer who works with the legislator and the community members to create the content of that bill and ensure that like everything in that bill is like within what our current laws are and that kind of stuff to ensure that it can be ran during the legislative session. And once the bill is filed, which it usually has to be done before a certain date, and like the earlier you file it, the better. So that way you can ensure that it's heard during the legislative session, because there's hundreds of bills that end up being filed during the legislative session. And like you saw in the video, not all of them even get to be heard at all. So step two is introducing the bill. So once a bill has been filed, it can be introduced as a formal bill into the legislature, and a member of the House of Representatives or the Senate can introduce that bill. The member who introduces it is called the sponsor. The bill can have multiple sponsors with different party affiliations and even in the different chambers. So there could be sponsors in both the House and the Senate, and they can also be what we call bipartisan, which means there's sponsors on both the Democratic and the Republican sides of that. The order of when the bills are heard and introduced is really ultimately determined by the chairs of the chambers and the committees, which you heard a little bit from Janelle about like who the chairs and leaders are in the House and the Senate in the full chambers, and then each committee as well has a chair that determines what the schedule looks like for how bills are heard. Once introduced, the bills get assigned a number and they're sent to committee that's connected to the topic of the bill. So currently, the House of Representatives has 16 committees and the Senate has 9. The number of committees may change depending on the elected leaders at the time. Sometimes they create new committees, sometimes they get rid of committees. Typically, you don't want your bill to get sent to more than 2 because, again, as you kind of see that really long process of how the bill becomes a law, the more committees that they have to go to, the more time that takes. You know, each committee has to come up with an agenda to be able to get through as many bills as possible. So if you end up going to 3-4 committees, you might end up running out of time for the bill to be able to go through the whole process. And so, yeah, then it'll ultimately like end up getting what we call stalled, which is where, you know, the session ends up ending and that bill didn't get through the whole process. So then it dies. A bill can pass, fail, or be stalled or tabled in committee hearings. So passing a bill means that it gets to move on to the next process, and that the legislators, the majority of them can agree that it should move on. A fail means that it doesn't get to move on because the majority of the legislators in that committee agree that it should not move on. Stalled is where it never gets to be heard. And tabled means that the majority of the legislators in that committee vote on it to be tabled, which means being put to the bottom of the docket. So they could potentially come back to it once they get through all of the bills that they have to get through, which is very unlikely. So oftentimes that means that they never get around to it and it ends up becoming stalled as well. So when the committee hears the bill, this is an opportunity for people to testify in support or opposition of the bill. You got to hear a little bit of an action call from YUCCA earlier, talking about that. And that's where community who, were a part of creating the bill, who support the bill, who really care about it, or who really believe that it's not the best for the state are able to go and share their stories with the legislators about that bill, and legislators take that into account when having their conversations about whether this bill should move on or not. The members of the committee can also suggest changes at this time called amendments for the committee to consider if they believe that there should be a change that could better the bill. After listening to the public and expert testimony, so in addition to the public being able to testify, via Zoom, in person, there's also experts that often come up with the sponsors, which can be like the community members. It can be, doctors, lawyers, folks who just generally care about this and are considered experts in the field, educators, to talk about it, and the proposed amendments of the committee. The committee will vote on the bill overall. If more than half of the committee members support the bill, then it moves on. And then if less, then it does not. And so after it kind of moves through those committee hearings, then it'll go to the full House or Senate for an additional vote by the whole House and Senate outside of just those committees. So that's what this would be, is the floor action after it's passed through the committees. It returns to that chamber that it's from. So if you saw earlier, the bills that YUCCA was talking about said like HB 34. HB means House bill, which means that it belongs to the House and was sponsored by a House member. And so it would return back to the House first for that vote, and then it would go to the other side of the Senate for its committees and Senate vote. And again, similar to the committees, they have a discussion. Typically, they don't often do public comment for full House or Senate conversations. And so they have a conversation amongst themselves about it. And then they vote to pass or fail this bill for it to be moving on forward. So like I said, if it passes through the full House of Representatives, it goes through a similar process in the Senate. Often there's similar committees, as you kind of saw earlier, like there'll be an education committee on the House side and an education committee on the Senate side, that it'll kind of go through. The bill must pass with the same wording in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And if there's amendments to a House bill or vice versa, the bill must go back to the original chamber to then be approved, to approve those amendments before proceeding, since there needs to be the House and the Senate chambers both have to approve it in order for it to continue on to the governor. When a bill is being considered in the chamber floors, leaders and partners participate in days of action, calling or visiting legislators to express their support or opposition to a bill. That's the way we're kind of able to interact with them in those ways. And then when a bill is being considered on the chamber, we may also show up at the Capitol building on the day of to rally, speak to the media, or do in-person storytelling with legislators outside of their chamber and committee time. When it gets to the governor's desk, after it passes both of the chambers, there's three things that can happen there. The governor can either sign the bill and then it becomes a law. The governor can veto the bill, which means that she would reject the bill, and it can go back to the House of Representatives and the Senate, which would both have to vote again by a 2/3 vote in each chamber to override that veto for it to become a law. As it mentioned in the video, that's not always super feasible because there's so much happening. So the more you kind of delay the time and the different steps that a bill has to go through, the more unlikely it becomes that that bill will become a law during that legislative session. And then the other thing the governor can do is take no action, so not sign it, but not veto it, which is known as a pocket veto. So the governor has a 20-day period between the end of the legislative session and that 20 days to be able to sign or veto a bill. And if she doesn't do that, then the bill will be pocket vetoed, which means it dies as well. Most bills that become a law typically take about 90 days to go into effect after the legislative session, unless there's some kind of emergency clause or it carries a later effective by date. Bills with an emergency clause go into effect sooner, as soon as the governor signs them. Awesome. So I've seen like there's some comments and stuff in the chat. I haven't seen if there's any specific questions, but that's generally like the process of how a bill becomes a law and the different things that it kind of has to go through. And then Janelle shared how you can connect with your legislator by finding their contact information. And again, you can do that by calling them, going in person to talk with them, and you can do that throughout the year. So I really hope that this was helpful for you all to be able to kind of see how this process works and inspires you to want to connect with your legislators and share your stories about things that are impacting you in your community. Awesome.
I'll jump in right away, Bella. There is a question that was given to us on Instagram that says, why hasn't bill language and propositions been simplified for modern times? And is there a movement to make these items more understandable for the public who aren't educated in this wording? So just to answer that quickly, a lot of the language that is used during the legislative process is quote unquote legal language because it is specifically designed to create laws, right? So there has to be an understanding in order to have clear interpretation and just like precise terminology. So that's one of the reasons why it hasn't changed. You'll have similar wording on how the legislature works in the state legislature and the federal one. So that's one of the things. But we do know that there are organizations out there who modernize the language, especially when they're posting about bills that they're supporting and things like that. So they'll make them more accessible to people who don't understand the language. I know it's very hard to read laws and bills sometimes, so it's always good to follow organizations that do that because they'll kind of break it down for you in a way that you'll understand what's happening in the bill. I think that's also important to be able to build a relationship with your representative or senator if you are following a lot of bills because they'll be able to individually talk to you about some of the things that they could be concerned about that is language in a bill or things that they really want to make sure are in the bill so that it doesn't get pushed out that we might not understand because of the language that is used. So super important question, and I just wanted to flag that. And I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, Bella.
No, I think that was, yeah, great. That, yeah, like as much as you can, like keeping up with local organizations that, like YUCCA, who are giving, plain to read examples of like what the bills are and stuff like that is the best way to be able for folks to be able to access what those things are that are happening. And then, was there any other questions?
I know in the chat there's a conversation about pocket veto versus like a regular veto, and that there is a effort to abolish the pocket veto because if the governor pocket vetoes a bill, they do not have to really say anything or give a reason to why. But if it is a regular veto, then the governor has to go on record as to why they vetoed this bill. So that's just kind of like an FYI that is an effort that's happening to get rid of pocket vetoes.
I also saw a question, I think you answered it, Janelle, but from Savannah about what determines the committees that will go under the House or Senate. And it's typically that the leadership will decide amongst themselves what topic areas are the most common for bills to be a part of. And then they typically will mirror similar committees, or at least committees on the other side of the Senate or the House that also take care of those same topics. So sometimes the Senate has some less committees than the House side does, but some of them combine more topics than the House side does. So typically they have similar topics on both sides. And so that's why a bill would be assigned to committees on both sides as well. But they can just look a little different or have a little different wording, and the leadership in those chambers decide what those committees look like. But if there's nothing else, thank you all so much for having us. And here's a little bit more information about Youth Voices in Action, which is our youth arm of our organization, and how to connect with us if you're interested at all. But yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I think this was super helpful for everyone that was able to attend. And I know there were some folks that were able to join us on Instagram as well. Before folks jump off, I did just want to give a quick invitation to join YUCCA as well as the entire No False Solutions Coalition this coming Wednesday, January 29th at 5:30 p.m. No False Solutions is going to be hosting a legislative roundtable here in Albuquerque at the Los Jardines Institute. More information is available on YUCCA's Instagram, but really this is an invitation for our community partners to attend and share your legislative concerns and really just participate in a roundtable discussion about the coalition's priorities for the coming session. So just wanted to be sure to invite folks to that while we have